Okay, so good morning, everybody. Right now I'm doing my doctorate in the great ideas, and I'm studying the great idea of beauty and the great idea of virtue. And for that reason is why Christine also invited me then to come and speak a little bit about virtue. And what I'm hoping to do in today's presentation is to demonstrate how having a virtuous leader is not just one more thing, but it is the thing that changes everything. Okay? It is the thing that is going to change society. It is the thing that is going to change our own environment to be better. The idea of virtuous leadership was actually developed by a Russian man called Alexander Harvard in his book called An Agenda for Personal Excellence. He tells the story about how one time he was talking to his students about Europe and the coming together of the European Union. And of course, the European Union he's talking about was 30 years ago, an idea of 30 years ago. It's not what is there right now. And so what Alexander Harvard is saying is that when he was telling this story, he was talking about these people from the United Kingdom. He was talking about the guys who were the foundation of this union. I'm just showing you the pictures. I'm sure they're more familiar to you than they would be, for me. But at the end of this, the students looked at him and they asked him a question. And they said, but who were these guys? And how do you become like these guys who have such a big idea of what Europe can be, is, and can become? And he's a lawyer. And so as he says, I thought this is not a question for law. And the students are not asking me how to just become a better lawyer. They were asking me, how can I become this person? Which is a very different question. And when you think about it, that is really a philosophical question, which goes down to the root of who am I and what can I become? Why are we discussing virtuous leaders, not just leaders? And our story is going to take us to Congo, yeah? And the president who was coming in was Laurent Kabila. Laurent was a rebel, and they'd been having many, many wars in the DR Congo. And after many years, Laurent Kabila managed to come with a group of, at that time, very young men, child soldiers, who were taught how to shoot and kill. And with this, he marched into the capital of DR Congo, Kinshasa. And you can imagine the shock, obviously, yes, of everybody, but even in the people of Kinshasa and everyone thinking, my gosh, but this is who is coming to liberate Kinshasa from the previous president, who also was not a very good person. He was corrupt, etc. So Laurent Kabila comes into Kinshasa. There's nobody. So he is the boss and he takes over. The interesting thing is, now this story I was told by my boss when I worked in something called the situation room that used to assess the situation, the different situations in Africa. So this story I was told by my boss then. He says we walked into the Intercontinental Hotel because everybody went to the Intercontinental Hotel. He says, and we walked into this room, and Laurent Kabila was sitting on his bed. He moved. He was wearing his silk pajama bottoms and the silk, the cover. You get that he wears it? And he had a bottle of whiskey and this chicken. And he was eating and drinking and eating and drinking. And, they're saying, so what is your vision for Congo? What is going to happen? Where are you going to? And he said, we want democracy. We're going to. And he says he walked out of that room and his heart was broken. Because DR Congo, please, let me just tell you, is the third largest country in Africa. It has every kind of mineral you can think of as a country. I'm not even talking about the hardwood. I'm not talking about the land. I'm not even talking about the people, just the raw material. And he said, this is the man who the country is waiting to rescue them. And there was a rumor that his first order of business actually was to track down Mbili Abel. Now, Billy Bell is a musician. It was one of those urban legends that go, but he kept asking, so how can I meet Billy Bell? How can I meet Billy Bell? Her music is really beautiful. She's amazing. She sings in Lingala, but surely this cannot be the first order of business. But it was. Since then, of course, he's dead and other people have taken over. But this was a pivotal moment for the country. So you see, it wasn't just to have someone at the helm to say, this is the boss, this is the manager. You needed to have somebody who is thinking about the vision, who is in control of their very self. You needed to have somebody who has virtue. You know, because you ask yourself, but is this something that is new? Surely. I mean, everybody knows by now we need virtuous leadership. Actually, this is a line from Macbeth by William Shakespeare. And Macbeth kills the king so that he can be the king, because he met the three witches and they told him that, yes, you know, you can become the king one day. Macbeth, well, hail Macbeth, king of Scotland. So then Macbeth starts thinking, what am I going to do? How am I going to become the king of Scotland? And he ends up killing King Duncan, his own cousin, right? And so then Macduff, this is one of the characters, you know, one of the people in the king's court, goes out and he's looking and he's wondering, we need a new king. We cannot continue with this guy. And so that's when Macduff says, there is not a devil as cursed as Macbeth in all of hell. We need somebody who is not Macbeth. Please come back and become the king. And Malcolm is playing a game with him, but this is what Malcolm says to him. I have no good qualities. I have none of the qualities necessary for a king, such as justice, truthfulness, moderation, consistency, generosity, perseverance, mercy, humility, devotion, patience, courage, and bravery. Instead, I'm full of every type of sin, and each of those in a variety of ways. No. If I had power, I would take the sweet milk of peace and pour it into hell. I would destroy all peace and all unity on earth. And this is a sentence that often haunts me, because Macduff looks and he says, oh, Scotland, Scotland. Of course, it's the same statement that my boss at that time also said about DR Congo. He said, the Greeks studied human nature and they studied human character. And after many years of studying them, Aristotle, Socrates, those guys, they came up and they realized that there is such a thing as a human nature. It exists. It is not a figment of our imagination. It is real. And he realized that there are two kinds. There are two components, or there are two ways in which this human nature manifests. The first one is biological. It already is. The second one, we build on it. There are some people who are sanguine, enthusiastic, optimistic about things. They're the melancholic. They're a bit, sad. They think about things a bit deeply. They're the ones who are choleric, very passionate and active. And then you have the phlegmatic who are very calm. Temperament is what I'm talking about here. It's your biological way of being. The point is, you need to know what we are working with. What is the raw material of the person that we are working with? And more importantly, what is the raw material I'm working with? Now, all these temperaments, there's nothing wrong with them. And if you think about it a bit deeply, you'll realize we actually need all of them. And with every action that we take, it builds on our temperament. And this is now our character. And if the action that we take consistently is a good action, in other words, you're not stealing from the workers, you're not screaming at your employees. If that action is a good action as opposed to being a bad action, then what we are doing then now is we are building a strong foundation of a good character. So through the actions of our intellect and our will, we form the second aspect of our nature, which is now this character we're talking about. It builds on our temperament, and this is who we are. So what virtues are we thinking about here? Well, the first virtue will be prudence, the habit of making the right decision all the time. The second one is courage. So it's the capacity to make a magnanimous decision and then to stay the course. because to stick with a bad decision that we've made is stupidity. And then, of course, we've got self-control. Oh, my goodness. I don't know if you've ever worked or been around a person whose emotions are all over the place and they can't stick. And today they're angry, so that everybody is angry. Today they're happy, everybody. It's about self-control and the ability to control these emotions and the ability to control what we are doing and who we are. And then the fourth one is justice. Am I just? Because you see, we are social beings, so how do we deal with other people? Are we unjust when we're dealing with other people, or do we mistreat them? We don't give them what is their due, right? So as a person, when you're thinking about who I'm going to become, what I'm really thinking about here is that how am I applying all these four virtues? And these are the good actions that I was talking about earlier that will lead us then to have character, to have a good character. And now, if we don't have a good character, if we don't have this moral authority, then you'll notice something, that we're going to try and rule people through force, potestas. You try to force people to do what you want, because deep down we know we don't have the moral authority, right? Instead of ruling them through authority, authoritas, informal power, they know that when you tell them to be honest, they know that you and I are honest. When we tell them, I need you to have all this done, they know that you and I are like that. This is who we are. And again, if we are these people in our private life, we will be these people in our public life. If you just practice the virtues every day and you try to practice these virtues, then you're a good person. And you have the raw material to be a leader. But there's still two more qualities that we need to develop. The first is magnanimity. Magnanimity is the knowledge that we're capable of thinking and doing great things. You know this in yourself. You know I can do great things, because we all can. No one has been built to do small things. Your great thing is not my great thing, and it is not their great thing. But everybody will do something great, and I will give you the example. And in each of these examples, it was a great thing. You will see. And the other virtue is humility. Yeah? Often when people think of humility, you think, oh, you know, I can't talk, I can't do too much. No. Remember we talked about the truth. So it's knowing what your talents are. If this is your talent, you know that this is your talent. If you can sing, sing. If you can teach, teach. If you can code, code. Be aware that this is who I am. This is my talent. And humility is to put this talent at the service of other people. This lady is Sirleaf Johnson. And now you have to wish me a lot of luck, because for a long time I've wanted to meet Sirleaf Johnson. She's written a book, but there's so many questions that we have. And she's still alive. She was the first woman president in Africa. And she took over from a country that was at war. She had a job at the World Bank, and all she wanted to do was to be an economist, and she was working as an economist. And then what she did is she realized that her country was collapsing, so now she got into politics, but she was with a group of people trying to build the country. People fell away, and in the end they said, Ellen, you run for president, and we will support you. And it was incredible, because Ellen, you know, had all the support of all the young people. So you realize that leadership is a moral issue. It's not about techniques. Like, this is how I'm going to control them, and this is how I'm going to make sure that they follow me. No, 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 no. People follow you out of their own free will, right? And so it's about the character. Who the person is plays an important part. And so, of course, when they realize that consistently Ellen is living up to her word, Ellen is trying to lead them to a specific direction, then this is how Ellen ends up being the first African woman president. Now here, I have in front of you is a picture of a lady called Wangari Maathai. She won the Nobel Prize. And now Wangari Maathai, okay, now we know her because she won the Nobel Prize, yes. But this is before she won the Nobel Prize. She was protecting the forest. She was a scientist, and she realized that the forest cover was disappearing. And so some rich people, very, very powerful, and when you hear very, very powerful in Africa, what that means is that very, very close to the president. And when you want to think of the power of the president in Africa, you have to think of Le Mariage de Figaro. Mm-hmm. So in the Mariage de Figaro, one of the fights that is being had is because the owner of the whole place, the king, the one who owns the land, wants to sleep precisely with the girl who belongs to his workers. And it was his right. I mean, just goes to show how much power the landed gentry was. They were very, very powerful. This is before democracy, before everything, you recall. So you have to go back to that kind of power of 16th century Europe, 15th century Europe. That's the kind of power the president had during that time, yes. So when he said he's going to cut the forest, he's going to cut the forest. And this professor woman comes and says, no, you can't cut the forest. Now, you think she was protecting it for herself? No. She was protecting it for everybody. This is magnanimous thinking. As you can see on that photo, she's already been beaten, but she got up and she still went and confronted them and said, you're not going to cut down this forest. This is magnanimity, capable of great things. So she was a biology scientist, but she was thinking of something much bigger. She's thinking of the future and future generations and what is going to happen. So in herself, she had to overcome her temperament, which was what? Phlegmatic. She's very calm. She's very peaceful. She's a scientist who works in the lab, right? And then she had to get a sense of justice and think, but this is wrong. So working with that virtue of justice, right? And making the right decision, prudence, and realizing, but we can't get rid of the forests. So do you see all the virtues coming in her, and her coming and saying, this will not happen. So, and that didn't happen. We still have the forest, and we still have the environment. Now, to understand, when you have to think about a country called South Africa. And South Africa, many, many, many years ago, was living in a system where it was divided. So you had the whites living here and the blacks living there, and they were not allowed to mix. Now, what people don't realize is that what happened when Nelson Mandela went to jail? He's in jail. There is no Twitter. There is no public communication system, and the white government is not going to allow this communication to take place. So who kept the memory of Mandela alive? It was Winnie. So Winnie is the one who kept talking about this thing and saying, it's unfair. You need to release Mandela. When you read her story, there's a moment she will say they would come into her house at any given time. And there's one very sad one, which I always remember, and it breaks your heart. Because, of course, she had children. She had 2 children with Mandela, and then he was taken away. I calculated it, and it seems like she was married for exactly like 2 months. They lived together as husband and wife as 2 or 3 months, very short time. And then the rest of the time, her husband was in jail for 28 years. So the police would come into her house, and one time they took her away for questioning to the jail. And she says she was going crazy because her children were left there. This was in the middle of the night. Her children had been left there, young children. They are holding on to her, of course, to their mother. And they grab them and they throw them back into the house. And she's taken to jail. Obviously, as a mother, you think, what's happening to the children? Because they're young, they're small. That wasn't, you get the picture, right? So she's in detention, but she's still thinking, who's got the children? Who went to look? Because she didn't have time to make a call and to say, come and get the children. And sometimes the neighbors will go quiet, of course, because it's the police, and then you can understand it. It may be wrong, but you can understand. You can see, okay. So at one point in time, they were fed up with Winnie Mandela. So they took her to a faraway town called Bramfontein. So they took her to a very small town, very far away, to a community where she didn't speak the language. And, and they warned everybody, and they said, she's a very dangerous person. Nobody should talk to her. So it was a community that was hostile to black people, and it was a community where, as a black person, she couldn't communicate with the other black people. So if you were Winnie Mandela, you will just keep quiet and live in your little house, right? Not Winnie. Not Winnie Mandela. Winnie Mandela, you have to understand, was a person who really did have an idea of greatness. She really had the idea of greatness, and greatness in other people. So it wasn't just about releasing Mandela. She really wanted to release people. So in this little town, what I found really admirable in her is because you remember she doesn't speak the language. She was humble enough to stand at her door, and she'd be talking to them, and she'd say hello. And she'd be trying to communicate with these people. She didn't have to do that. And then she begins to look like the one who is in need. You see what I mean? So when she went to fetch the water, she'd be trying to talk to them a little bit. She's not saying, oh, I'm this powerful Mrs. Mandela. No, she's trying to learn the language from them. You see how it works? And like that, little by little, because she was a social worker by training, she first of all invited them to her house. And a clever woman, because by law, she wasn't allowed to have a meeting with I don't know how many people in the room. So they would sit in another room, and she would sit in this room, and she would teach them how to knit. She taught them how to bake bread. When she found out how expensive, because you had the white shopkeepers, yeah, they own everything. So then the bread was really expensive, and she says, no, I will teach you how to make this bread. She opened a little nursery school for their children because she realized there was malnutrition, they were not eating properly, they were not being fed properly. Now, do you understand here, the amazing thing about Winnie is that, but she already is suffering. Her daughter, in the end, was collapsing, and she was suffering from depression because she was here with her two daughters. So one daughter went away, she's with one daughter. She has her own issues. And what made me admire her is that she still had the time to change that community, and she changed it. By the time she was leaving, they had opened a nursery school for the children. They were baking their own bread. They used to not be allowed to try on clothes when they walk into the department store. They were now allowed to do that. She changed that. They had water. Water was brought nearer. In the midst of everything, she was suffering, because you have to remember, her husband is away. The police are attacking her. But she had the time to help others. Every time I read this, I'm like, how did you do it? Magnanimity, humility. She starts by you see what I mean, pretending, but she starts by making friends with them. She doesn't wait for them to even come and make friends with her. And from that, she changed this place. Anyone who's thinking, but I'm not like Winnie Mandela, I'm taking you to the story of this lady. Anne-Marie Dupreez is a journalist, and she's an Afrikaner. Winnie inspired a lot among the young people. Remember when he talked about moral power? She inspired this among young people. And by the time Mandela was coming out, most of the population was many young people. It could be that was why the political system started pushing her aside. And then she was accused of many, many things. Some could be true, maybe not. But I remember this lady because this lady went and wrote her story. And in 2020, during Corona, during the book club, I wanted to invite her to come online and we could have a meeting with her. And I found out that she died. But she wrote that story. See, the stories that are now being written about Winnie are not this story. Yeah, they'll talk, it's true about the torture and everything, but she really captured certain details that may escape other people. For example, at the end, Winnie was being accused of being corrupt. That's because she lived in this house and the government is providing for her. And this lady writes and she says, of course, on paper, if you see one person who lives in the house and the electricity bill is this much and the food bill is this much, of course it looks like corruption. But this is Winnie. Winnie was never alone. Winnie always had a village with her. Always. This is why the police had to move her to Braamfontein, because in her little house in Soweto, people would keep coming to her, oh, I have this problem, oh, I have this. She wasn't really, in real terms, alone. So if she lived in this house, you can bet there were other people who lived with her in that house. So yes, of course her electricity bill is going to look like that. Of course all this. But you have to understand her. Because Winnie had a sense of responsibility for people around her. She really did. Because, you know, she could have left and gone to live abroad as Mrs. Mandela. But she wanted to, and she had opportunities twice. Again, you come back to the book, to leave the country. And then she says, no, I won't leave. I'll stay here with them and I will suffer with them. What I'm hoping to ignite here is the sense of mission that we all have. So I think that Anne-Marie, even if she's not aware, lived a certain mission, which was to keep this story alive. And so it's an ideal for life. We're talking here about leadership. It's an ideal. It's something we really must strive for. Yeah? It's, in a sense, it sounds big when we say I have a responsibility for the world, because the world is big. But then the world is also what I am doing here, you and I. And we can do one thing, one small thing, to change this piece of the world. And that's what's going to make the difference. And this is why we insist not just on leadership, but on virtuous leadership. Leadership based on goodness. And then magnanimity and humility. And with this, we can change the world. Thank you.